Hello, Professor Wallacord and company. It's good to see you in a virtual manner. I know this is a tough time that we're away, but hey, still learning. I appreciate the scan of the Rushdoony, Larceny in the Heart, and here I go. I'll do the chapters 1 through 4 summary in about 5 to 8 minutes, probably around 7 minutes or so. Took some notes, read through it, and then just kind of going to go through all the main points of each chapter. So starting with chapter 1. So for chapter 1, it was all about inflation, and one of the greatest farces for our day is the war on inflation. So what I got is that politicians neglect to state that the immediate cause of inflation is the increased supply of money, and it's kind of about the central civil or stratist agencies. And so basically in this chapter, as inflation increases, so does the power. And the main goal for anyone, any government, any people, humankind, anything like that, the overall goal is to have, the most power. Um, but as stated in this chapter, real power is the authority of God. Authority of God has over man. He is sovereign. He alone is sovereign. And the biggest thing with this chapter is to realize that God walking on earth is God's law being sovereignty is what creates the power. So it's God's authority over man. So all in all, inflation is larceny because it really is kind of a theft of the human mind. So it's your own mind, your own body. So kind of having this inflation of wanting the most money, raising credit, raising power in human hearts and minds, that's that theft of your own heart and mind. Another note is saying that the federal government encourages debt in a number of ways. Um, for example, one would be like, say, owning a car. If it's your own car and you work hard for it, it's your own money, then you're going to take care of it. But if you rent it, then you don't care as much because it's not technically yours. So you just kind of flatten it, don't take care of it as well. So I think that had a lot to do with how the government encourages debt because one of it is to tax advantage to debtors, so to give people in debt the free type of money and whatnot, and also by supply increasing the availability of credit. Sorry, and then so in terms of cheapening money, um, unbacked paper currently and increases quantities, which causes inflation as well. And lastly, it's just kind of geared to consumption, not productivity. So just don't be so greedy with that. Some more notes. This is chapter 2 on regulations, which is a necessary part of life because the unregulated life does not exist. Regulations govern us each day, but it all kind of starts with the law of God, the law of our own morals, regulations that we learn from reading the Bible, reading about God, from our families, what our parents have taught us, friends, schools, if we went to a private school, Christian school, whatnot. It's kind of just the everyday life. So then it kind of went on to talk about 2 myths of regulation that statists include, which is one, it is held that all life outside the state and its controlling government is unregulated life. And in all honesty, if that were the case, it would just create a bunch of chaos. And 2, the non-state regulated life is a lawless life. But in a biblical faith, law is the perspective of God. And since God is above man and is sovereign, he alone is sovereign, then we have to realize that the regulations of God come forth over that authority um, and law and morality. So it's a dangerous myth because then it's kind of unregulated and tends to be immoral. A third myth is that state the agency that the source is both law and morality. So I guess I kind of mixed that up, but yeah, so that's immoral. The fourth is that status legislation and controls lessen the regulation of society instead of enhancing it, and that's contrary to belief, just simply contradicting to what we are taught from the Bible. And the fifth myth is that status control lessen freedom. But if we're governed by God and the freedom of God, we got to stop letting the state and enemies of the state control us because God alone is what we need, and following his regulations itself is the most important thing. So chapter 3, I know I'm at 4.5 minutes, I'll go through this quicker, is about rationing. So it all starts with the Garden of Eden. We know the story of Adam in Genesis and Eve, and how Adam kind of had to start everything from his own humankind, his own hard work, because he was the first person on earth, didn't really understand the way of life. So he used his own mind and body, had considerable tasks, at hand and to do on his own, and he had to name animals, and he felt lonely, so that's where Eve comes in. Everything that started with Adam and Eve is their way of creation leads to the rationing. So then first rationing is pricing. The price of goods is the oldest and most successful means of rationing in the world. Therefore, prices are the only effective means of rationing. So every point of, say, quality and availability has to do with the pricing of the quality of the items. And second, the means of rationing is by state controls, which means that the people of the state, because every says that everyone should have goods, milk, food, housing. Um, but really, you kind of wonder on that case, is it like, but it's more about um, how God, the hardships of Adam and what he gave to Adam and Eve, more so than anything else, rather than just giving everything to them and say what would modernly be a socialist way. So that's the biggest part with that. 6 minutes, give me 2 more minutes. So chapter 4, this had to do with the economics of Satan. So states that Satan sees himself as an angel of life, far from it, obviously, decided on his own what is good for mankind, and that kind of leads to our own greed, our own uh, wanting of everything, our own wanting of free things, our own selfishness, and so forth. So a good example that I got from the chapter is the temptation in the wilderness, because the first temptation is saying that Satan said, "If thou be not the Son of God," and the second was, "Command these stores be made bread." So he had a heartless plan, completely different, obviously, from God's plan for us, and how we learn economics. So Satan, honestly, is basically working as a socialist, wanting greed and away from God, as he really wants everything to thrown at people, kind of in a want everything given to them, think that's the only way to pursue life, forget about God because you have everything right in front of you, selfishly, greed, I keep mentioning the same thing. Um, but God tests us. He tested Adam, he tested Eve because he wants them to work hard for what they earn, what they get, and is what we as people today should do as well. So that kind of has a lot to do with that story in Genesis, and it's kind of a lot like we work here on earth. Like our whole ultimate goal is to get to heaven. So how we live by faith, how we live in our own hard work, the steps we take to want to get to our ultimate goal of heaven, it all starts from the bottom to the top. We all start from scratch. And we don't get things handed to us. Like we don't just get to heaven by not believing or working towards God and his creation. So lastly, Satan is still with us in economics and with the Garden of Eden, but we got to get past that. Thank you.